जय श्री राधे, श्री वल्लभाधीश की जय हो। सब वैष्णवों को जय श्री कृष्ण, जय जय श्री राधे. Day 174, Varta 156, the story of a Vina player from Natadwara. He is a Bhav Prakash. He is a devotee of Sattvic disposition. In the eternal Leela, her name is Vina. She sings most beautifully and her voice sounds like that of a Vina. She is very dear to Sri Thakurji and she manifests from Sugandhini and is thus a form of her divine loving sentiment. Here he was born into a Sanadhya Brahmin family in Gopalpur, Natadwara at that time. He was initiated as Sri Gosaiji's disciple when he was a child. He was only 10 when his parents died. He then had to go to live with his grandfather in Mathura. His grandfather was a very fine Veena player and he taught this art to his grandson. He also became a fine player. So he reached the age of 20 and got married. He then returned to his family home in Gopalpur with his wife. They had a son and a daughter. The Veena player had a problem feeding them properly. Someone told Sri Gosaiji that he was a very talented Veena player and that he was his disciple who was a poor householder struggling to make ends meet. Sri Gosaiji invited him to play the Veena for Sri Govardhanaji and thus receive a daily stipend of prasad. The Veena player was very happy to accept this position. Part 1. The Veena player played for Srinathji before he arose and after he went to bed. He played very sweetly and Sri Nathji was extremely pleased with him. Sri Gosaiji was also very happy. The Veena player was a householder and when it was time to arrange the marriages of his children, he had no money. He had no income at all. They were living off the share of the prasad that he received from the temple. Prasad was not sold. The prasad was distributed and if any was left over, it was given out to the Vaishnavas. The Veena player considered, I should go to Gujarat and earn some money. Then I can deal with the marriages of my children. He thought about going. Srinathji, of course, knew his mind and thought to himself, now he will be going off to Gujarat, then who will play the Veena to me? Of course he needs some wealth to run his household. After the Lord was settled into rest for the night and everyone had gone back home, Srinathji put one of his golden bowls inside the Veena and then took rest. In the morning, when the Veena player began to play, he saw the bowl inside the instrument. He realized that it must belong to Srinathji. When Sri Gosaiji entered the temple and sounded the conch shell to commence the morning seva, and when he went inside, he noticed that the golden bowl had been by Srinathji's bedside was not there. He thought to himself, wherever it is, it will return from there. After making the morning offering, Sri Gosaiji was sitting near the entrance gate. The Veena player came to him and placed the golden bowl in front of him. Sri Gosaiji asked him where he had found it and replied, "Oh Maharaj, it was inside my Veena." Sri Gosaiji knows the inner heart of everyone and he knew that Srinathji, being very pleased by the Veena player, had presented it to him. Sri Gosaiji said to him, Srinathji has given you this bowl as a gift, so please keep it for yourself. The Veena player replied, "Oh Maharaj, how can I possibly keep Srinathji's bowl? It should remain with Srinathji himself." Sri Gosaiji said, "I am instructing you to keep it." The Veena player then responded, "Oh Maharaj, I shall keep it since it is your command. I am your servant. Therefore I am giving this to you as a donation." He put the bowl in front of Sri Gosaiji and prostrated before him. Sri Gosaiji cleaned it and put it inside. After this, Sri Gosaiji perceived what was in the Veena player's mind. He asked him, "Where were you thinking of going? Were you thinking of going somewhere?" The Veena player answered, "Oh Maharaj, I need some money for my household duties for my children's marriages. Therefore I was thinking of going out of town." Sri Gosaiji interjected, "Please do not think of going out of town. Srinathji is pleased with you. If you need some money, I shall give you some out of the store." The Veena player said, "Oh Maharaj, how can I possibly accept Srinathji's wealth?" Sri Gosaiji said, "Okay, then I shall take it from my own." The Veena player replied, "But oh Maharaj, I must not take wealth from my Guru." Sri Gosaiji said, "Okay, then I shall get you some Vaishnavas to help you. Please do not go out of town." A little while later, a group of Vaishnavas arrived from Gujarat. One of the Vaishnavas had a lot of money. Sri Gosaiji approached him and said, "The Veena player will not take money from Srinathji. The Lord gave him one of his golden bowls and still he did not accept it. Nor will he take from me. Srinathji is very pleased with him. He is a householder and needs money for his children's marriages, and therefore is ready to travel afar. Srinathji is not pleased with this idea. Please give him whatever he needs for these marriages." The Seth gave the money to the Veena player, and he performed the weddings with it. When more need arose, Sri Gosaiji got the Vaishnavas to provide for it. Sri Gosaiji in this way stopped the Veena player from going out of town. Sri Govardhanaji and Sri Gosaiji were both always very pleased with the Veena player. Bhav Prakash. The moral of this story is that anything that is part of the beloved Lord's paraphernalia is divine, and one should never regard it as mundane. A Vaishnava must never accept wealth that belongs to the Lord or the Guru. Thus concludes Varta 156, the story of the Vina player from Srinathadwara, who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is no end to his story. Continuing today with Varta 157, the story of Premji Luhana, who lived in Halar. This is a devotee of Rajasi disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Prema Prakashini. She manifests from Sundari and is thus the personification of her divine loving sentiment. Part 1. A party of Vaishnavas once travelled from Halar to Gokul. Premji was in that group. They all had an audience with Sri Gosaiji, and Premji supplicated Sri Gosaiji, "O Maharaj, please take me into your shelter." Sri Gosaiji initiated him with the Lord's name, and after he had fasted for a day, granted him the Brahmasambandh initiation. The group then travelled to have the holy site of Sri Govardhanaji. Premji took Sri Gosaiji's permission to go with them. He had the holy site of the Lord and then returned to Gokul. The group stopped in Gokul for 4 or 5 days, and then they decided to circumambulate the whole of the Vraja area. Premji asked permission from Sri Gosaiji to accompany them on the tour. Quite a few days later, when the tour was complete, Premji came back to Gokul and went to Sri Gosaiji, who said, "Oh Premji, you have completed the tour of the Vraja land?" Premji said that he had, with his grace. Premji then asked him, "O Maharaj, what should I do now?" Sri Gosaiji told him to bring the Seva of the Lord into his life. Premji replied that he would love to do it if it were simple, so Sri Gosaiji gave him a sacred prasadi garment of the Lord to worship. Sri Gosaiji instructed him, "This is very simple Seva, but at the same time it is by no means ordinary. If you wish to adorn and sanctify the Seva, then do so. If you cannot, and fancify the Seva." If you wish to adorn and fancify the Seva, then do so. If you cannot, then at least offer some cloth, and always offer every preparation that you cook. Premji then stayed on in Gokul and enjoyed having the holy sight of the 7 Swarupas of the Lord that were served by Sri Gosaiji's 7 sons. When the group set off, Premji also took leave of Sri Gosaiji and returned to Halar. There he performed very nice Seva. He would make Seva in the early morning, adornment and midday periods, and then during the afternoon rest period, feed prasad to any Vaishnava that came there. Then he would go off and do some work to earn a living. He would come back in time for the afternoon Uttapan Seva. With that much work, he was able to sustain a reasonable living. He bathed before the Uttapan Seva and then continued loving service up to the Lord, up to the night-time rest period before sitting for divine discourse with other Vaishnavas. One day he began to think to himself, "Other Vaishnavas have Sri Thakurji who actually speak to them. I asked Sri Gosaiji to grant me a simple seva. Sri Gosaiji said, however, that this seva was simple but certainly not ordinary, but my seva does not speak to me." He then bathed and started the Uttapan Seva. As he gazed at his seva, he had the vision of Sri Krishna together with his whole gang of cowherd friends. He saw forms of the Lord in every single thread of the cloth. He had the holy sight of the Lord's Swarupas all over the seva area. He thought, "Sri Gosaiji has fulfilled my every wish. This is certainly extraordinarily simple, special seva. However, it is essentially also very simple. I do not think that I would be able to adorn and dress up so many Swarupas altogether." He then made the offerings of cooked preparations, and when the time was up for receiving prasad, he saw that his seva was now again exactly had it always been, his seva to the sacred garment. He thought to himself, "Sri Gosaiji is so merciful. He fulfills the devotee's heart's desires and gives them exactly what they wish for." After this, Premji began to serve even more lavishly and enthusiastically. He would go to the satsang groups to listen to divine discourse. His Sri Thakurji began to bless him with his direct experience. The moral of this story is that Vaishnavas should have total faith in Sri Gosaiji's words and should perform their seva with heartfelt sentiment and love. Soon the Lord will grant great grace and allow his direct experience. Thus concludes Varta 157, the story of Premji Luhana, who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is no end to his tale. So we'll conclude today's reading here. Tomorrow we will commence Varta 158. So for day 174, Aaj ke Anand ki Jai Ho, Jai Shri Radhe, Sab Vaishnavan ko Jai Shri Krishna, Saprem, Sanamra, Sadenya, Sadar, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Jai Shri Radhe.